Hi, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. I've taken a long time to record this video because, one, it's a touchy subject and I know it. And I know some people are going to be bothered by the terminology here. I do respect that. I hope you'll see why there's no way around this classification, even though I use the term very hesitantly out of the sensitivity that the term mansplaining is thrown around a lot, often unfairly, but that's true of a lot of terms. And when something is a thing, you should be able to call it what it is, despite it being overused, despite it being misused a lot. I think you'll see why, as I continue to talk, it's appropriate in this case. So I just want to say that right off the bat. If you've had a bad experience with this term, I totally understand. I know what that's like. But I don't ban people from using words just because I don't like them either. You guys know that. But some people may not know that because there's been significantly over 500 new people subscribing to this channel of late. Almost 600 now. There's been quite a few subscribing, so you are new. Welcome. You may not know me that well because you found it through the YouTube algorithm, so you may know nothing about me. In case you are watching every day now, I don't do public videos on Thursday. Those are for my patrons. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK if you want to see those. There's a lot more of my cat Momo, who was in yesterday's video, with that content. I have 7 cats and a dog. So there's a lot of cat stuff, but also behind the scenes stuff, explaining how projects are going. If there's a delay, I tell the patrons. If something cool happens, I tell the patrons. I use my Patreon community as sort of an insider circle, because I trust the advice of people who are willing to pay for my content. That's an important voice to have, an important voice to listen to. Listening. I'm big on listening, because listening would have prevented 4 different guys from mansplaining me on The Last of Us 2 this week. And part of the reason I use the term mansplaining is because these guys are all self-described liberals. These ones I know about. And they would consider it totally valid to describe something as mansplaining, even though they do it. For people who don't quite know what mansplaining is or aren't sure what it is, the definition I use is a more specific one than some people. Some people define mansplaining as anything anything sort of patronizing or condescending said by a man to a woman. I go more specific than that. I like specific definitions. For me, mansplaining is a man commenting on or explaining something to a woman in a condescending, overconfident, inaccurate, or oversimplified manner. That quality of it, of you being a condescending jerk and also wrong is an important part for me, because talking to people in this community, listening, a lot of guys have said that, you know, they're not athletic, they're not terribly good looking. They said that, not me, but they're smart. And they want to be useful because men like being useful. And so they share knowledge to be useful. And they swear up and down that they talk to their male friends the exact same way. They talk to everybody that way. As you'll see from the handy flowchart I'm going to show you, if you talk to your male friends the exact same way, you're not mansplaining. More on why in a bit. But so I'm careful of that. If someone's right and they're just awkward about it, that's fine. Because you know what? They're right. There's nothing wrong with stating a fact, even if you're not the most suave in saying it. But here's the thing about this particular topic. Not only was it about the depiction and writing of the 2 female playable characters in The Last of Us 2. I've been playing video games since 1981. I started in arcades on games like Asteroids and Missile Command and Pac-Man and Wizard of War, which was awesome. I mean, I had been in the arcades for a while before things like Duck Hunt came into the arcades. And Hogan's Alley, they made that when the Nintendo came out. No, I predate that by a long time. Like, Mortal Kombat was the first game I played that was both on coin-op and then on console. But before that, there were games you could only play in the arcade, or you only got the real experience in the arcade. The console ports just didn't play the same. I swear by that. But yeah, Wizard of War. I love that freaking game. And the only reason I was allowed to play that game is I'd wait until my mother was playing Centipede, so she wasn't paying attention, and then I'd go play Wizard of War. Because my mother didn't like that, because I played that game so long that I have dreams about it. Because of the voice and everything like that. But man, that game was awesome. But Pac-Man was the first game I played. I called it Baka Baka, because I was only 3. My mother lifted me up sometimes when there was no stool or it wasn't like the tabletop thing. But I'm going on at length about my gaming experience because knowledge and expertise is important to this, okay? I've also been covering games as a producer since the mid-1990s, on camera and as a writer under my own name since the mid-2000s. So I've been doing this a long time, even if it was just straight up my own byline stuff. 15 years is a significant amount of time. I've also started doing some stuff on the game development side as well now. I lecture at colleges on video game stuff, specifically gendered performance in video games, how gender can work as a system in a game. It's kind of important. It's not just cosmetic. So expertise, right? But on top of that, there might be something that is evidently apparent and relevant to this. I am a cisgendered woman. That's relevant to this because Ellie is a cisgender woman. She's a lesbian, but she's a cisgender woman. And Abby, despite what some people say, is a cisgender woman, I believe. I don't think she's trans. I'm pretty sure she's a cisgender woman. So I have much more experience and much more knowledge about what it's like to be a cisgender woman and to be raised a cisgender woman. Now, trans men have some experience with this. None of these people who mansplained me on this were trans men. That would be like, okay, you grew up assigned female, you kind of get it. All right, cool, right? Like you have sort of the requisite experience to be able to talk about this from the inside. Cisgender men don't have that. Right? They don't. Just point of fact. Remember I said it's okay to point out facts even if you're indelicate about it? Indelicate's a better word than I said before. So we had a scenario where these guys know I've been covering games for a really long time. They know my pedigree. They know my reputation. They also know I'm a cisgender woman. And they still argue me on points of The Last of Us 2 related to that. Meaning, basically, no, certain things read when you're a cisgender woman. You know what? Or a trans woman. I'll just say women for this being inclusive, because in this case, it actually is. It is a universal thing. Certain things just read differently to women than they do to men. And this is something that's sort of difficult for both sides of this divide to understand, because it's very hard to take on a perspective other than your own. which is why I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that, you know, guys are sensitive regarding mansplaining. It's a term that's not going to apply to me, so I have to sort of be aware of that. And why I am very clear that it's not just about explaining something as a man. To me, you have to be ignorant and wrong on top of it as well. Because you know what? It's fair. But that's what it's about. It's about being open to listening to the other perspective. None of these guys did that. Like, not in the slightest. They all tried to convince me that the game was brilliant. And that's different than them just saying they liked it. If they left it liked, it's like, fine, like it. Good for you. I don't. And I can give you a ton of reasons why I don't. But I've had to re-record this video 7 times now because I get worked up about it and accidentally drop a spoiler, and I don't want to do that because certain things are pissing me off so hard. And I will talk about it someday. But today is not that day. I want to give more people a chance to play the game. So the problem is that I'm like, nope. You know, I will say that I think both Ellie and Joel are written in some ways totally inconsistently with the way they were written in the first game. Not going to get into that. Got into that a little bit yesterday. Not going to get into that too much yet. I'm going to play through the game on Twitch and then talk about it. Because that'll give people enough time. After a certain time, if you're really concerned about spoilers, either like play the game at launch or avoid the content. There's a certain time that it's appropriate to give people to play a game. Makes sense. Or see a movie or all that stuff, right? You can only not be spoiled for so long, especially this game. And I was pretty good at avoiding most spoilers. So when I'm watching the game, that's legitimate. I didn't watch any of the leaks. I saw only a few like freeze frames. So this was all new to me. And I was like, what? But, you know, I was like, no. And here's all my reasons. And no, I hate every character in the game except Jesse. And no, you're not going to change my mind. And the more I said, you're not going to change my mind, the harder these guys pushed to change my mind. And I do not believe for a second, because of some of them, I've seen how they interact with other dudes. And I've seen other dudes go, dude, stop. And they listen. So there's definitely a discrepancy. This is not, I assume they don't talk to guys this way. I've seen these guys not talk to guys this way. Very important, right? And this is the problem with the whole left on this whole issue, is that too many people see progressive values as, instead of being ideals that we all fall short on, they see them as, well, I identify as progressive, so you can't label me the way you label those other guys. And that is not how it works. If you identify as a centrist or a conservative, I'm not going to be nearly as hard on you. Because, you know, if you don't mind your P's and Q's and all this stuff, you're not inconsistent with your stated values and identity, right? Like, you don't get identity points for things unless you can walk the walk, if that makes any sense. And there's this whole phenomenon surrounding The Last of Us Part 2 that, like I talked about in previous videos, the game is for men. And that's a central problem with it. It masquerades as not being for men, but it is for men. And again, I'm not going to get into why right now, but there are just so many markers of, and it's not just for men. It's for a very specific type of man. And this is where I think that when you are a AAA game with a massive marketing budget, it's not that it's wrong morally to narrowly aim your intended player that way. It often is not good for business. And the reason it's not good for business is that glowing write-ups in the New York Times, it is just so schizophrenic in terms of its direction right now. And, Vox, and they didn't succeed with Polygon. Hats off to Maddie Myers. At least she's being consistent. Aiming for that liberal intelligentsia slot. You'll get a lot of write-ups. Those people don't play games. Not regularly. And I don't take my word for it. I have heard from developers who got glowing write-ups in the New York Times that that's great. We can put it on the wall. People who read the New York Times don't buy console video games at the same rate as people who read like IGN or, other websites, that even Kotaku, right? Like that's more in line, which is why I find a lot of Kotaku's content strange. And that matters because there's this phenomenon in media that is poorly understood. A bad movie or a bad game might make a lot of money. A mediocre movie or a mediocre game will definitely make a lot of money and get very high scores. More on that in a bit. The flaws in the product don't impact that game. It impacts the next one. Because when people go to buy the next one, the experience they recall from the last time influences their buying patterns. For instance, I didn't buy BioShock Infinite Burial at Sea. A lot of people that I respect very much said it was great, but I really didn't like the first game and I paid that full price. I'm not buying DLC for a game, the base game. I felt I did not get my money's worth. I did not enjoy that experience. I didn't like the narcissism inherent in the design. And there's another one, 10 out of 10, all over the place. And I'm like, no, that game is an 8 at best. The Onslaught has gotten a lot better now for various reasons, but that's just, I think, because first of all, certain guys who were really rough on me about that in the past have been run out of gaming for being dirty perverts. True story. But it's also just, oh no, that you don't do that to a woman now, which is condescending in its own right. But it's almost worse what's happening now, because it's the right thing. It's the hive mind right now, right? Ironically, opinion in gaming right now is being infected by, this spore type mentality. And because it's the left, people just automatically adopt the right thing to say. Even if they don't quite know why, even if they may not totally agree with it, they know it's the right thing to say, so they say it. And then they have to double down on the right thing to say, precisely because they don't really understand it. It's not an opinion which can change. It's an identity piece. I am left-wing, therefore I must believe this. Now, the right does the same thing on certain topics. They just don't apply here. But when confronted with anything that might challenge that piece of worldview or piece of identity, instead of being persuaded by the new information, the person is affected by a cognitive failing known as the backfire effect. Somebody presenting you with information that basically disproves your worldview makes you believe it much more strongly. And this is a real thing. And I think that's what's driving the mansplaining on The Last of Us 2. People, for reasons I will get into much later, some people find this game to be like a religious experience. I think, anybody who finds this game like that, I feel really bad for them, because I think they're probably a victim of abuse and don't recognize it yet. Or they do and they're not over it, because one of the reasons I'm rejecting this game so hard is I feel abused by, it's an inherently abusive game that gaslights the player on various things, about abusive people. And it's claiming to make some statement about the human condition, and it does, but not the one they think they are. But again, more on that later. I'm used to taking a beating for not liking stuff that other people do. I didn't think Game of Thrones was that great from the beginning. That was an unpopular place. I didn't like the Avengers movies. That was unpopular too. It's funny how more and more people are sort of coming around to, yeah, they were just okay. That's funny, because I made a really good friend with one. She happened to be female in this case, but she disagreed with me. But she did it in a respectful place and actually backed up her point of view, and we could actually have a discussion about our different points of view. And funny how that works. You don't have to agree with your friends. You just have to respect their opinion. And that's what's not happening here. So, in case people are still like, but, because I know people try to find every reason to hand wave away, to dismiss things that make them personally uncomfortable, because they either have been accused of mansplaining or they're afraid they might be. And so they try to find any way to justify bad behavior just to sort of be internally consistent. I have a chart that gives you a sense of whether or not you are mansplaining. And it's great because it's accurate. Oops, wrong button. Okay, where is it? There we go. Okay, here we go. Am I mansplaining? This is a chart created by Kim Goodwin. See, credit. It's on bbc.com. I will link to it if you want to go through. Am I mansplaining? Did she ask you to explain it? Yes, not mansplaining. Real simple, right? I'll actually give you a really easy way to not mansplain at the end of this. It's one weird trick, but oh man, it makes a huge difference. Okay, so did she ask you to explain it? No. Do you have more relevant experience? Okay, yes, by a fair amount. All right, keep going. Would most men with her education experience already know this? This is critical. The other way you can say this is, are you talking to her the way you talk to your male friends? You have to invert the answers there. But like, would you say this to a guy, right? No. Did she ask did you ask if she needed it explained? Yes, and she said she did. Okay, that's not mansplaining. Do you see how it cannot be mansplaining? Like, it's possible. Yes, and she said no. Just stop talking now. I did not ask. Probably mansplaining. Okay? So ask. If you catch yourself explaining something and you're getting kind of a... or if a person is noping hard the way I was, ask. But it's this, would most men with her education and experience already know this? And this is the part that I encountered this week. Yes, if I were a guy in this conversation, dude would have stopped talking by now. They would have hit the red part, but no, they were mansplaining. So let's back up. Do you have more relevant experience? About the same, or I'm not sure. And this is where people start going, it's a game. One person has no experience or another about whether they like a game. Yes, that is true. As long as you stick to, I like this, I don't like this, people can't argue you, okay? You're allowed to like a game. There are some admittedly shitty games that I enjoyed. I know they're shitty, but I enjoyed them. Too Human is one. I admit that in public. There you go. But I will not claim that Too Human is a brilliant game or even a good game. Its inventory management system was steaming vomitous crap. I admit that. I'm not saying it's brilliant. The people I'm talking about objectively said The Last of Us 2 is a brilliant masterpiece, so on and so forth. That's can be argued objectively. And Buddy, who does not have the same credentials I have, does not have the same lengthy experience with video games, length and breadth, right? Now that not that we're whipping out and measuring it or anything, but I do have more relevant experience, and they're treating me as if, I'm not sure you do. You're mansplaining, very likely. Now, if she has more relevant experience, like I did in this case, definitely, again, because it's not about whether or not you like the game, it's about whether or not the game is objectively good. And then you get into, critics, more on that in a bit. But in this case, it's actually, did she ask you to explain it? No. Do you have more relevant experience? She has more and is a well-known expert. Just stop talking now. Okay? And that's the thing. It's how much expertise does somebody have in this field? And this is where we get into the appeal to popularity that is a logical fallacy for a reason. I have been around so long, and I have been on the unpopular side that turned out to be right so often. At this point, I don't know why people don't just listen to me. I mean, BioShock Infinite, glowing reviews. You know, the game was on fire until the last 6 months, and it shows, right? Like, that game feels incomplete. But oh no, big glowing thing. Why? Because it validated, like The Last of Us 2 does, it validates the particular kind of guy who reviews games. Not who plays games, who reviews games. There is a tiny slice in that Venn diagram that overlaps, but otherwise there's a lot of difference between those two groups. And that type of guy is in many cases a fucking terrifying human being, but more on that another day. But I go all the way back to not thinking Halo 3 was a very good game. It was fun. I played through it. It had a lot of features like couch co-op that mean I bought it. The minute they took couch co-op out of Halo, I stopped buying it because the only reason I bought the game is my husband liked to play it with me. But Halo 3 was objectively nowhere near as good a game as Halo 2 in terms of the base game. You talk about things like, the Forge and all that stuff. Okay, interesting tech, but as a game, phoned in. Oh, no. Oh, all the controversies I have found myself in the midst of, only giving Halo 3 an 8 out of 10 was likely the greatest amount of abuse I have ever received on the internet over a video game. It was that insane. That was akin to heresy back then. And of course, subsequently, it turns out that Bungie started increasingly phoning it in after Halo 2. And yeah, Halo 3 was sort of a placeover thrown together piece of crap. Now, that doesn't mean if you liked Halo 3, you have taste up the ass. It just means that you're not as able to pick up certain cues that something is going on with the development cycle or the people involved in the game. Now, what I will give Halo is that Bungie is very good with community, the shitting the bed on Destiny of late aside. It does not feel ever as narcissistic as BioShock Infinite and The Last of Us Part 2 feel. And this is one of these things, this is a philosophical thing, that there are different types of products, and what it means to do your job as the top person on different types of products varies, right? If you're making a summer blockbuster, your primary job is to show people a good time. If you can make a point over and above that, great, but don't let it take away from the fun. Your job is not to win a whole bunch of Oscars. Your job is to make a fun afternoon or evening for someone in the dead of summer or the dead of winter where the weather's horrible a lot of places and people want to go in for the overpowered air conditioning and overpriced popcorn and just be taken away from their troubles for a while. They want to be affirmed. And to me, a AAA game kind of fills the same space, right? If you can make a point, the way something like Death Stranding does very well, go for it, But it's got to be a fun ride. And personally, I think if you're in charge in a budget that big and you're coming at it in any place in any way, going, we don't use the word fun to describe our game, then go and make an indie game where you don't have to sell as many copies, you don't have to have such wide appeal, and people are playing that for a completely different reason. I think the game series that does this particular balance best is the Far Cry series. Those are deep games, but they do not lecture you. And I thought the ending of Far Cry 5 was... I like the ending of Far Cry 3 better because it more rewarded you for paying attention. Far Cry 5 kind of did too, but no matter what, it was sort of a bummer ending. To me, the right ending from a roleplay perspective was also kind of a bummer ending. I won't say it in case people haven't played it. But Far Cry 3, 4, and 5, there was some heavy stuff in those games because Far Cry games take place in failed states, which means a lot of horrible shit goes down. But if you want to ignore all of that and just enjoy it for, in my opinion, some of the best first-person open world action gaming that gaming has to offer, you go right ahead. If you just want to play the shit out of that thing and enjoy it and not care about the themes at all, go right ahead. There's nothing wrong with that, But there is more depth for people who care to look. They do make a point, but they do it being perfectly fine if people miss that point. And they've managed to construct a type of story that the key to understanding a Far Cry story is the challenge is to remember who you were when you entered that place at the end. Because that impacts your final choice in a really, really important way. And I find that really clever. Now, Far Cry 3 punishes you really super hard for not doing it. Far Cry 4 less so. Far Cry 4, I thought it was interesting because there were multiple valid endings. I admit by the end of Far Cry 4, I was so disgusted that even though I know it's not the right choice, I felt better just shooting Pagan Min in the head than doing the correct thing. And the thing is, there's no correct thing. It's what you choose to do. And that's brilliant game design. That is brilliance. That is a brilliant freaking game where they have multiple endings, but it's no good ending, bad ending. It's what ending do you feel encapsulates your experience the best? I personally thought with Mass Effect 2, I found it more satisfying to have a few characters die in that final battle than to have everybody live. I know the alleged ideal ending is to have everybody live, but I didn't find that as satisfying. That's brilliant game design because there's multiple right answers. When a game is shoving a moral down your throat in a heavy-handed way, it should not be a game. It should be a movie. And that means it fails as a game. It's the wrong story for the medium. Now, again, in indie games, different story. That is a place for experimentation. But I do not consider a piece of interactive fiction to be truly brilliant unless it is truly interactive. And something like Far Cry, or even the interesting experiment that's going on with Assassin's Creed before it became kind of a victim of its own success. And there, you know, there's an example of a company that realizes that subverting player expectations in the way they did, even though it was justifiable, was probably the wrong call. Because let's face it, like, people have to enjoy your game, and you know, they learned their lesson with that. I know another Ubisoft title. What can I say? Ubi just, for all the kind of frustrating things about Ubisoft as a company, they have a humility inherent to the products they put out that is refreshing. And I know the company's not perfect. I know there's some stuff going on there. I mean, heck, didn't the owners get convicted of insider trading or something like that? Obviously, that's not good. But in terms of the product they produce, those are brilliant games, even when they're heavily flawed, even when they take risks that don't quite work. There's no way you can argue that a game that is essentially very linear, that takes choices away from the player and feeds you a whole bunch of shit about what that means, that's not a brilliant game, because it's a movie where you push buttons. And that is a definitive statement. And that is something that people can argue. And you know what? I'll acknowledge there's no right or wrong answer on that, because that is a matter of opinion. But that's the point. Let other people have their opinions. So I'm going to close. I know this has gone on for a while. This is a longer than usual video by a long shot. But here, if you're still watching, here's the way to avoid any chance of mansplaining in one easy step. You don't have to stop and ask if you're really excited about talking about something. There's a guy I know who just, he must have seen my Twitter feed or something like that about K-pop, and he's a big fan of Chinese pop music. And all of a sudden, I had like 12 Facebook DMs about Chinese pop. That wasn't a guy who was mansplaining. He was just really excited about Chinese pop music. Okay, I had no problem with that. I was like, whoa, this is more than I ever thought I wanted to know about Chinese pop music. But I thought his enthusiasm for the subject was kind of cool. That is not mansplaining if you seem really excited, right? It's the condescension. But here's a simple way to avoid it. And I've seen people do this, and it's very charming to boot. You catch yourself explaining something. All you have to do is, or before you launch into an explanation, say, I'm sure you already know this, but here, I like talking about it, right? I'm sure you already know about this, but this is a subject I get really excited about. Go on and talk. You've eliminated the condescension from it because you've said, I'm sure you already know this. And somebody may go, actually, I didn't know that. But if they didn't, it just tries their patience a lot less when you're not explaining something like it's genius in a way that is not only like, you know, a person sitting or not listening to you because they're thinking, who doesn't already know this? But you're also not quite right. You're oversimplifying it, or you're getting things flat out wrong. That's a really easy way to avoid accusations of mansplaining. Because then if someone says, you're mansplaining, it's like, no, I assume you already knew. Completely diffuses that bomb. So there's your tip. If you're worried about mansplaining, really easy way. And you know what? It's just a good thing to do in conversation, just so you don't accidentally offend anyone. Because I know a lot of guys who don't like being talked down to as well. So there it is. Like I said, this video is long, but help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Most people have stopped listening since by now, but that's okay. Thanks for watching.